Chapter 1. Little Bit. Old Thad Conway sat on his front porch and rocked while he called to mind the happenings and the people of years long ago. What took place when he was just a boy seemed more clear in his recollection than what had happened only yesterday. There was the day when Thad's father had brought home the little Spanish mare. The whole family had gathered around the wagons as father and 16-year-old Travis drove in. They had gone to Waco to buy supplies, as they did once every year. They had bought flour and cornmeal, beans and dried fruit and lard. This time they had also bought a new gun and plenty of ammunition. They had bought bolts of calico from Mother Conway's dresses, and for summer dress shirts for Thad and Travis and their father, as well as hickory cloth for their work shirts and gray wool jean cloth that Mother would make into breeches for them. They bought a new iron stove for Mother to cook on in place of the fireplace she used ever since she and Father had come to Central Texas and started this ranch. Thad had never forgotten how she ran admiring fingers over its smooth blackness, nor how the tears of happiness shone in her eyes. He had been happy for her. Waco was 120 miles away, and Father and Travis had been gone 3 weeks. The very first sight Thad's eyes had taken in when they drove into the yard was what was tied to the tailgate of Trav's wagon. "Why, Pa!" he exclaimed. "Where did you get that miserable old crowbait?" She was the sorriest looking specimen of a horse flesh he had ever seen. Thad loved horses more than most people and always would. But more than that, a horse was very important to a boy, man, or woman on the western frontier of Texas in the year 1863. Why, she can hardly stand up. When Thad patted her mud encrusted nose, she nickered weakly and rolled gentle eyes toward him. His heart went out to her right then and there, poor specimen though she appeared to be. Tears of pity rose to his eyes, but they remained unshed. Thad was 12 years old, and such a big boy simply did not cry. There was a jagged white scar on the little mare's left hip that looked like a pair of open scissors. It appeared as though it might have been a brand, but the boy examined it and found it to be a scar from some old injury. It would serve as a mark by which to recognize his pony. She was his, for Pa had said, "She is all yours, son." "She looks mighty near starved," Thad said. "Indians had her," Trav explains. "We got her off some rangers this side of Waco. They hid a brush with some Comanches a while back. After the Indians took off, the rangers followed them a little way, and they found this Spanish mare. The Comanches had turned her loose because she was played out. They had ridden her down like Indians do. I reckon they stole her off of some white settlers," Thad guessed. "Of course they did," Travis agreed. "Maybe from some of those Spaniards down in Mexico. Might have killed off the family, too." One of the rangers felt sorry for her and fed and watered her, Father Conway explained. "But he couldn't keep her, so I took her off his hands." "How much did you give him for her?" Reed asked. Reed was Thad's eldest brother, and he was a Texas Ranger, as Thad hoped someday to be. Now, he was at home for a week nursing a crippled arm. He had taken an arrow in it while fighting with some Comanches a few days before. The Ranger was having some blacksmithing done when we went to have Star and Jerry shot. and he said he would let me have the pony for the price of his blacksmithing. It was 4 bits, 50 cents. Mother and Reed both laughed. Reed said, "Figure you got yourself beat out of 50 cents at that. What made you buy her?" The fellow told me she seemed gentle, and I agreed that Thad here would like to have her. So he's so tender-hearted about animals. Those little Spanish ponies are tough and wary, Trav remarked. Even though they're not very big. She's not old either, 3 or 4 years at the outset is my guess. Thad looked closer at the little mare and saw that her mane and tail, now full of cockerels, would be long and thick when curried. Her hide would be black and shiny when it was healed of the skinned places and had the mud brushed from it, a little fat built in under it. He loved the little mare from that minute. He spent the rest of the afternoon rubbing the mud from her and petting and putting salve on her cuts and skinned places. Then he curried her coat until it shone. She loved the attention. He petted her and talked in gentle tones into her ear, and she seemed to fall in love with the boy, as he had with her. Thad's dog, Wiser, a big old yellow hound without much ancestry to speak of, sat and watched the whole proceeding. Thad had to pet him a little now and then too, for he did not want him to be jealous. That night, just before bedtime, the family were still joking Father Conway, Conway about buying the little mare. "Well, she'll be pretty when Thad gets done with her," he said. "Some of those Spanish horses have Arabian blood in them. That's why her eyes are so big, her nostrils so wide, and her ankles so slender." "She sure is a little bit of a thing," Mother remarked. "Little bit." Thad jumped from his chair and shouted the words. "That's what I'll call her, Little Bit." "One thing I forgot to tell you, Thaddy," his father said. "The fellow said that she could smell Indian farther than a hound can smell rabbit. So when you're away from the house, you watch her and she'll let you know if any Indian is nigh." Mother and Father Conway were both born in Missouri, which was frontier country in those days, but they were from restless stock and kept moving along towards the west every generation in the hope of bettering themselves. That's how America got itself got itself settled up. Everybody knows that Mexico and Texas used to belong to Spain. Later, when Mexico won her revolt against Spanish rule in 1821, she took Texas with her. Moses Austin got permission from the new Mexican governor of Texas to bring in 300 families of settlers from the United States across the Sabine River. Soon afterward, he died, but his son, Stephen F. Austin, went ahead with his plans. Both of Thad Conway's grandfathers, Grandpa Wilson and Grandpa Conway, were among those first settlers in Texas, where they had made their home beside the Brazos River. There, Louisa Wilson and Sampson Conway grew up together as neighbors and were married. From the day they come to Texas, both families and their neighbors had fought Comanches. After their first two children were born, Samps and Louisa Conway got to that same crowded feeling that they that had made their ancestors itch to move. So they traveled farther west to the extreme frontier in Brown County. Here they established this ranch on the banks of the Pecan Bayou, a dark stream that wound between deep banks where tall pecan and elm trees kept in perpetual shade. That was in 1851, and the Comanches, who were consistently being pushed farther west, had been kicking up trouble ever since. Horse stealing was one of their most frequent offense against the white settlers, but house burning and murder were also among their accomplishments, embellished by a kidnapping now and then. For 2 years after we moved here, Thad had often heard his mother say, I never laid eyes on another white woman. There were a few footloose young men, but no young women here on the frontier. I was a happy woman, I can tell you. When Tom and Ellie Clark moved in 2 miles up the creek, she and Ellie Clark had become fast friends and would remain so all their lives. Talk around the fireplace or on the front porch at the Double Bar O Ranch was most often of Comanches and their ways. Sometimes these days it was of the war between the states that was going on far to the east of Texas. Few of the men from this part of the state had left for the war, though Texas was now part of the United States, having fought with Mexico to gain her independence. Every able bodied settler on the western frontier was needed for protection against the raiding Comanches. One spring evening, when the breeze from the faraway Gulf was blowing soft and gentle, and the chill had gone from the air, Reed remarked, any moonshiny night now you can expect the Comanches to raid you. I'll have to join my rangers tomorrow, but you ought to be fairly safe with Ben Atkins and Tom Weaver and Charlie Bunyan here with you. Ma and Travis and Thad are pretty good with a rifle, too. Where do you suppose they hide out when they're not raiding? Thad asked. They do very well, young'un, Reed answered. The United States government has given them territory up beyond the Red River in the nations. Is that what you call Indian territory? Thad asked. That's it, his brother answered. The government feeds them and gives them clothes if they will stay there, and most of the tribes are satisfied to stay. But the Comanches are a wild bunch. When the weather is warm enough, they move down into West Texas and steal from the settlers along these creeks. That's why they don't bother us in the winter, Thad guessed. That's the reason. Old Yellow Cloud is supposed to be the chief of the band that does the raiding in this part of the country. The raiders have been on the lookout for his hideout way out west of here for a long time now. If you could find them, would you get back some of our horses they have stolen? Thad inquired. Youngin, Reed replied. By that time we catch up with those horse thieves. They've driven them clear across the border into New Mexico and sold them to the Comancheros. Comancheros sell them into Old Mexico, and there our brands don't mean a thing. Our horses are gone for good. As summer came on that year of 1863, the raids commenced. The fearless family over the Lonesome Creek, 15 miles away, was wiped out, with the exception of one 14-year-old boy who was away from home at the time. By the 1st of July, the Comanches had raided the Conways' Double Bar O Ranch on two different occasions, stealing horses each time. There seemed to be a member of the raiding band that had taken a fancy to Little Bit, for on both occasions she was among the horses stolen. Thad's dog Wiser and Travis's hunting dogs woke the family both times before the Indians had got away with more than a few head of stock, so Little Bit must have been snatched right at first. Both times she came back within a week or two, tired and dirty and hungry. her mouth sore and bleeding from the jaw rain the Indians used. "I have a sneaking idea," said Pa, after the second time she was taken, "that these thieves must be a few young bucks, maybe in their teens, and one of them has taken a special liking to your pony." No one knew the ways of the Comanches better than Samps Conway, so Thad felt he must be right. He kept the pony, curried until her coat was shiny black, and her mane and tail were as long and thick and soft as a woman's hair. He really could not blame the young Indian who wanted her for his own. After the second time Little Bit was stolen, Thad fastened her outside the window of the room where he slept. He used a heavy chain to tie her to the thick log wall. That, he believed, would make it hard for anyone to steal her. A week later, on a night when the moon rose at 3 in the morning, Thad heard Little Bit give a frightened snort. She was pawing at the wall, and the dogs were barking "Injun" as plain as they could. Thad seized his gun and leapt from his bed. "Trav, Trav!" he yelled. "They're after Little Bit." He ran to the window. The dogs were barking now down toward the creek bank where the barns and corrals were located. Little Bit was snorting and pulling at her chain. Thad had started to follow Travis when he saw Ben Atkins and Tom Weaver come running from the bunkhouse. They were all heading in the directions the dogs had taken. But Thad wanted to make sure that Little Bit was secure and unharmed, so he stopped to look her over. 5 arrows hung from her body at crazy angles. His father joined him. He had not followed the others, for he said, "Those Indians may just be setting a trap by tolling the dogs away to get us to follow them. Then some others will attack here at the house." Now, as he looked at Little Bit, he said, "I reckon those Comanches have made up their minds that if they can't have your pony, they'll fix it so you can't have her either." "Pa," Thad asked anxiously, "do you think she'll die from these arrows?" "No, son," his father answered, as he worked one of them from her shoulder. "I don't think she's hurt very bad. She's losing a little blood, but she won't suffer any bad effects. Of that I'm sure. None of them has struck a vital part." The others were coming back from the corrals. "They've gone," Ben Atkins said, "and I'd be willing to bet that it was only a couple of young braves trying to get Little Bit." Brown County, Texas, in those faraway days, was a good place to live in spite of the danger, and no one dwelt too much on that except during the summer when the Comanches were active. In the spring, the flowers blooming for miles among the mesquite grass, filling the air with the drifty perfume. Thad's head was fairly set to spinning as he galloped through them on Little Bit. Thad wore his gun whenever he left the house, winter or summer. Often as he started, he would hear his mother calling, "Thad, have you got your gun with you?" It seemed a strange thing for a mother to say to her 12-year-old son, but no one, boy, man, or woman, dared go far from home without a gun in that part of Texas. One never knew when he might be jumped by Indians. Then there were snakes and bears. In winter, there might also be a lofer wolf to shoot at. A calf or colt had small chance for his life when a wolf found them, so wolves were shot on sight.